This all started through my love of horse racing. I fell in love with horse racing when I was probably about 16. I watched the Melbourne Cup when I lived in Perth and I was like, that's amazing, I really want to go. So the next year my mum was lovely enough to take me there and I've been obsessed with horse racing and hats ever since. My name is Lisa Tan. I'm a milliner based in London and right now we're here in my home, which is also my studio in Putney, and I'm going to show you around what I'm creating at the moment, including a very special piece for the Melbourne Cup Carnival. My mother and my grandmother were probably the ones who got me into millinery in the first place. Neither of them were milliners. My mum did make a lot of clothing though, and that's where I got my passion for designing and making my own clothes when she taught me how to sew. But my earliest memories, I can always remember that every time Melbourne Cup rolled around, they were desperate to win the best hat prize. And year after year, they'd win these amazing prizes through the best hat competitions. So I guess when I became involved in horse racing and the fashion side of racing as well, it was because I actually tagged along with them one year. I think I was 17 and I was studying fashion design at that point in time and I had the day off, so it was great. So I actually got to experience my first Melbourne Cup luncheon with my mum and my grandmother, and I just remember sitting and watching the race and actually really getting excited about the race itself and thinking horse racing is awesome, I need to do more of this. This is where the magic happens, which is also known as the area in between my living room and kitchen. Usually I sit here and I do all of my work and it kind of is pointed in the direction of the TV, which is handy for when days like this when the racing's on. I do sit here and watch the racing. I think it's a nice way to work. I am working on this piece at the moment. This is actually for a really special exhibition that's being held in Melbourne this year for the Melbourne Cup Carnival. And it's being held at my stockist over there, which is a department store called Maya, and they are one of the major sponsors of the Melbourne Cup Carnival. They've asked all of their milliners to create a special piece that they will display during the Melbourne Cup Carnival and just before. The theme was Melbourne Cup, and they said we could do whatever we wanted, but obviously they wanted something really eye-catching and something really colourful. It's a technique that I've used on all of my boaters, which I'm kind of known for at the moment. So these are all blocked on flat piece of board, and this is actually what they look like before they get trimmed. But essentially it is cinnamé. So this fabric is called cinnamé and it comes flat in a roll. And I cut it on the bias. So if you can imagine fabric, it has a warp and a weft grain. This is some fashion speak now. And if you go across, it's the bias. And when you go across, it stretches. So basically we can stretch it into this kind of a shape. And then we block it and it sets, which means we wet it, we steam it, we get it into place, and then it dries, and then it stays like this. So that's how that one comes about, and usually I use this method to make brims for boaters. And I thought it would be a really nice way of incorporating that into a hat without having to do an actual boater, and that's where the Cooley design came into play. So the colours are actually inspired by the sunset over the sea. So we sort of, you know, start with an inky sky and then it starts to get dusky pink and then the sun comes through and then it travels down into the water, and that's where I got that idea from. It was really exciting to be asked to be part of the Royal Ascot Millinery Collective, because for as long as I've been a milliner, and especially over here, I've always wanted to do something with Royal Ascot. I mean, they're the pinnacle of racing in Europe, if not the world, so why wouldn't you want to be a part of that? And especially since they've put in place those new rules about what sort of hats you can wear and the fact that you do have to wear a hat if you're in the royal enclosure. It's so great that they're supporting us in that way as well. The difference between Melbourne and, say, Royal Ascot, with Royal Ascot, people really love to get bespoke things made. So they'll come to you and they'll say, this is my outfit, what do you think? And we'll look at all sorts of different things. I'll pull out everything that I've got. We'll mix and match styles. I'll dye things if necessary, buy some extra trims in, and we usually end up making really, really unique pieces. With Melbourne, because obviously a lot of it's done via email, or even nowadays I find a lot of people are DMing me on Instagram. They'll have seen something that they like, and so they'll just place a direct order for that. Maybe they'll say, you know, my dress is a slightly different shade, can you match it? But it's usually a pre-existing style. So I'm not as much into the horse racing as I was when I lived in Australia. These days it's fashion, unfortunately. When I used to go for the Melbourne Cup before I became a milliner, every year I would go regardless from Perth. That was my thing and I loved it. And I'd go over there and, you know, it would be fashions on the field in the morning. Once that was over, I'd get to the nursery or the rails or wherever they were situated. And that was it. It was horses from that point on. And now I'm sort of like flitting around, seeing them for a glass of champagne. Bye, I've got to go for this. And then I have to go back and judge fashions on the field or something and come back. Yeah, they're not impressed at the fact that I'm not paying that much attention to the racing, and it's probably showing in my punting ability, unfortunately.